What if being born a bastard was the best thing that ever happened to you? Picture this: a warm spring evening in rural Tuscany, April 15th, 1452. The sun sets behind the rolling hills, casting long shadows across olive groves and vineyards. In the hamlet of Anciano, surrounded by the distant peaks of the Apennines, a baby takes his first breath in a small stone farmhouse. The smell of wood smoke and fresh hay drifts through the open windows. The cry of a newborn pierces the twilight silence, echoing across fields where peasants are finishing their day's labor. Emotion value tense, but this child carries no legitimate name, no inheritance rights, no predetermined future that anyone could predict. His father, Ser Piero da Vinci, is a respected Florentine notary from a family that has practiced law for 5 generations. His mother, Caterina, is a young peasant woman whose exact identity remains shrouded in mystery even 5 centuries later. Some historians believe she was Caterina di Meo Lippi, a local woman of modest means. Others suggest she may have been a freed slave from the Middle East or North Africa, which would explain certain features in Leonardo's later self-portraits and his lifelong fascination with exotic cultures. The baby is illegitimate. In Renaissance Italy, that single word could destroy a life before it began. But here's the thing about closed doors. Sometimes they force you to find windows no one else has noticed. Sometimes the very barriers that seem to limit us become the catalysts for extraordinary achievement. This child would become Leonardo da Vinci, and his illegitimate birth, far from ruining him, would set him free in ways that legitimate sons could never experience. Think about it from a modern perspective. How many great innovators succeeded precisely because they approached problems from outside the establishment? How many breakthrough ideas came from people who never fit the mold society tried to force them into? In Renaissance Italy, legitimacy meant everything. It was not merely a legal status, but a complete definition of what a person could become. The social order was as rigid as the stone walls of Florence's great palazzos. Legitimate sons inherited their father's professions, their social standing, their predetermined place in the carefully ordered hierarchy of Florentine society. They received formal education in Latin, the language of law, medicine, theology, and the church. They attended universities. They joined prestigious guilds. They married well and passed their privileges to the next generation in an unbroken chain of respectability. Emotion value 10/ the rules were clear. The system was fixed. Everyone knew their place from the moment of their birth. Leonardo received none of this. No Latin meant no university. No university meant no traditional profession. No traditional profession meant no respectable career path that society recognized. The doors that opened automatically for legitimate sons remained firmly closed to him. Every privilege that other boys took for granted was denied to him by an accident of birth that he had done nothing to cause and could do nothing to change. But what did those closed doors actually prevent? They prevented him from becoming a notary like his father, spending his days drafting contracts and recording property transactions in dusty offices. They prevented him from following a prescribed path through institutions that demanded conformity, that trained minds to think within established boundaries, that valued precedent over innovation and tradition over curiosity. Sound familiar? Today, we call this failing forward. Bill Gates dropped out of Harvard. Steve Jobs never finished college. Mark Zuckerberg left his dorm room to build Facebook. Elon Musk ignored conventional wisdom to pursue electric cars and space travel when experts said both were impossible. The pattern repeats across centuries. Sometimes exclusion from traditional paths creates the very freedom that enables revolutionary thinking. For his first 5 years, Leonardo lived with his mother in that rural hamlet. experiencing the rhythms of agricultural life up close. The changing seasons painted the Tuscan hills in shifting colors, from the green of spring to the golden brown of harvest time. Birds wheeled overhead against blue skies and gathering clouds, their flight patterns capturing the attention of a child who would one day try to understand the mechanics of wings. Water flowed through irrigation channels carved into the rocky earth, demonstrating principles of hydraulics that would occupy his notebooks decades later. Every natural phenomenon presented itself for observation by eyes that would later see what no one else could see. Imagine that childhood, the illegitimate boy watching nature with nothing else to occupy his time. No Latin lessons to attend, no preparation for the family profession, no expectations pressing him toward any predetermined future. Just endless hours observing insects and flowers and cloud formations, storing up visual memories that would fuel a lifetime of creation. The smells of the countryside, fresh earth after rain, the sweetness of blooming flowers, the sharp scent of cypress trees standing sentinel on distant hillsides. This freedom to observe without agenda may have been the most valuable education Leonardo ever received, while legitimate sons were being groomed for their father's professions, learning the manners and expectations of their class. Leonardo was learning to see. He was developing the observational skills that would later distinguish his art and science from everyone who came before or after. Emotion value tense to then. In 1457, everything changed. Leonardo moved to his father's household in the town of Vinci. He joined his grandfather Antonio, his uncle Francesco, who would become a lifelong friend, and his teenage stepmother Albiera, who showed him genuine affection but would die young. At 5 years old, he was separated from his mother and thrust into a household where his very existence represented an awkward truth about his father's past. What does it feel like to be that child? Knowing you belong and don't belong simultaneously. Knowing your father's legitimate family must accommodate you, but never quite as an equal. Knowing that every door that opens for your half-siblings will remain closed to you. The uncertainty, the anxiety, the constant awareness of being different in a way that cannot be changed or hidden. This dual consciousness, this perpetual sense of being both inside and outside, which shaped Leonardo's entire approach to knowledge. He never took anything for granted because nothing was ever simply given to him. He questioned everything because he had no institutions or traditions to lean on for easy answers. He observed obsessively because observation was the one tool that birth status could not take from him. His childhood education followed conventional patterns for boys of his time: reading, writing, and arithmetic. Basic skills that any moderately prosperous family would provide. The fundamentals necessary for commerce and daily life. Yet there was one crucial omission looming large over his future. He did not pursue Latin, the cornerstone of formal Renaissance learning, until much later in life. He would acquire it independently as an adult, teaching himself through sheer determination and curiosity rather than formal instruction. This apparent disadvantage became his greatest liberation. Had Leonardo been legitimate? Had he received that Latin education? Had the university doors swung open for him? What would he have become? Another notary, almost certainly. Another lawyer drafting contracts in candlelit offices. Another professional following his father's footsteps into respectable obscurity. 5 generations of his father's family had practiced law. The weight of that tradition would have crushed any other path. Family expectation would have bound him to a profession that valued precision over creativity, precedent over innovation. Instead, his illegitimate status gave him flexibility in how he approached his own life and career. Freedom to explore wherever curiosity led, without the burden of family tradition pulling him back. Freedom to question what others accepted as settled truth, without the authority of institutions telling him what to think. freedom to pursue knowledge across boundaries that others dared not cross because those boundaries had been erected by the very institutions from which he was excluded. Leonardo later recorded only 2 significant childhood memories, just 2 experiences that he considered worth preserving from all those early years. Both reveal something essential about his fundamental nature, about the mind that would later revolutionize art and science simultaneously. The first involved a kite that dropped from the sky and hovered over his cradle. He interpreted this as an omen, a sign of his destiny written in the language of nature itself. A bird of prey descending upon an infant, its shadow passing over his tiny form, its wings spread wide against the Tuscan sky. What does it mean when the first story you tell about yourself involves the heavens marking you for something extraordinary? What does it mean when your origin myth centers on flight, the very subject that would obsess you throughout your life? The kite memory also reveals Leonardo's conviction that he was destined for greatness. This was not arrogance, but a sustaining belief that allowed him to persist through decades of incomplete projects, failed commissions, and social marginalization. He believed the universe had marked him, and that belief gave him permission to pursue visions that others considered impossible. Emotion value tense. The second memory occurred during mountain exploration, when the young Leonardo discovered a cave opening in a rocky hillside. The darkness frightened him. His body urged him to flee. But the unknown possibilities within that darkness intrigued him even more powerfully than fear repelled him. Terror and wonder intertwined in a single moment that captured his fundamental relationship with knowledge itself. Here's what you need to understand. The cave memory reveals Leonardo's entire philosophy of learning. The darkness terrified him. Every instinct urged him to flee to safety, to turn back toward the familiar light. But the desire to know what lay inside proved stronger than fear. He entered the cave anyway. He moved toward the unknown precisely because it was unknown. This pattern would define his entire life, driven by curiosity that overcame every other instinct, including the most basic instinct for self-preservation. These weren't random recollections. They were the memories Leonardo chose to preserve, the stories he told about his own origins. One spoke of destiny perceived in nature. The other spoke of fear overcome by overwhelming curiosity. Together, they defined the man he would become, someone who believed he was marked for greatness, and who would conquer fear through the relentless pursuit of understanding. Now picture Leonardo at around 14 years old. His father faces a decision that will determine his illegitimate son's future. What do you do with a bright boy who cannot follow conventional paths? A boy who cannot attend university, cannot join the family profession, cannot marry into respectable society. A boy whose talents are obvious but whose birth status closes every traditional door. Ser Piero made a fateful choice that would change the course of art history. He apprenticed his son to Andrea del Verrocchio, one of Florence's most accomplished artists. Verrocchio, known formally as Andrea di Cione, was both a preeminent sculptor and painter. His workshop stood at the epicenter of Florentine artistic excellence during the Renaissance's golden age. The Medici family themselves were among his patrons. Why art? Because art was one of the few prestigious careers open to illegitimate sons. The guild system that controlled Florentine commerce offered pathways for talented outsiders that the learned professions of law and medicine never could. A painter needed skill, not bloodlines. A sculptor needed ability, not legitimacy. The workshop became a meritocracy in ways that Renaissance society as a whole could never be. Talent mattered more than birth. Leonardo became a garzone, a studio boy. At approximately 14 years of age, the smell of oil paint and metal filings filled his days. The sound of hammers on bronze echoed through the cavernous workspace from dawn until dusk. Apprentices ground pigments into fine powder using mortars and pestles worn smooth by generations of use. Master craftsmen debated perspective and proportion while working on commissions for the wealthiest families in Florence. Young Leonardo absorbed everything, not just techniques but ways of thinking, methods of problem solving, the integration of art and engineering that defined Florentine craft culture. By 17, he had advanced to full apprentice status, beginning a rigorous 7-year training that would transform him from talented youth to master craftsman. But Verrocchio's workshop was not merely an art school. It was a polytechnic academy before such institutions existed, a place where the boundaries between disciplines that modern universities enforce so rigidly simply did not exist. Leonardo received comprehensive training spanning painting, sculpture, and technical mechanical arts. He mastered drafting and drawing, certainly, but also chemistry for mixing pigments, metallurgy for casting bronze, mechanics for building scaffolding and lifting equipment, and carpentry for constructing frames and panels. He learned metalworking, plaster casting, leather working, and woodwork. He developed skills in drawing, painting, and sculpture simultaneously. This multidisciplinary foundation would prove essential to his later polymathic pursuits. Can you imagine a modern education that covered so much ground? Engineering, chemistry, fine arts, fabrication, design, all integrated into a single apprenticeship lasting 7 years. Today we separate these disciplines into different departments, different buildings, different careers. Students specialize earlier and earlier, knowing more and more about less and less. Verrocchio's workshop taught them as one unified approach to making things work and making things beautiful. The same observational skills that captured light on a painted surface could analyze water flow in canal systems or mechanical advantage in siege weapons. Leonardo also worked in the adjacent workshop of Antonio Pollaiuolo, broadening his practical knowledge across multiple artistic disciplines. Florence itself provided the perfect intellectual climate, catalyzing his polymathic interests through exposure to the city's vibrant culture of innovation and discovery. The city was a cauldron of creativity. The Medici family patronized artists and scholars with unprecedented generosity, transforming Florence into the intellectual capital of Europe. Humanist philosophy flourished in academies and salons. Ancient texts were being rediscovered and translated, opening windows into classical knowledge that had been lost for centuries during the medieval period. The very concept of individual genius was emerging from medieval collectivism. This was the world that shaped Leonardo's mind, a world he could only enter because traditional paths had been denied to him. By 1472, at age 20, Leonardo achieved a significant milestone: acceptance into Florence's Painters' Guild, the Guild of St. Luke. He had attained master status. The illegitimate boy from Vinci had become a recognized professional, qualified to run his own workshop and take his own apprentices. Yet remarkably, he remained in Verrocchio's workshop for 5 additional years, demonstrating his commitment to perfecting his craft before establishing independent practice. Why stay when he had earned the right to leave? Perhaps because the learning never stopped. Perhaps because belonging to the workshop community meant more than the freedom of independence. Perhaps because Leonardo understood that mastery required time that impatient ambition would not grant. Modern research speaks of the 10,000-hour rule and the value of extended, deliberate practice. Leonardo intuited this principle 5 centuries before anyone named it. He wasn't ready to leave, not because he lacked skill, but because his perfectionism demanded more time, more learning, more mastery before he would face the world independently. The same perfectionism that would later prevent him from finishing commissioned paintings also drove him to pursue excellence beyond any reasonable standard. His earliest documented work dates to August 5th, 1473, a pen and ink drawing of the Arno Valley, revealing his keen observational skills and technical precision even as a young artist. He drew what he saw with meticulous attention to detail, capturing not just shapes but the quality of light falling across the landscape, the atmospheric effects of distance, the texture of rocks and vegetation. According to the Renaissance biographer Vasari, Leonardo collaborated with Verrocchio on the Baptism of Christ, painted between 1472 and 1475. The painting shows Christ being baptized by John the Baptist, with angels attending the sacred scene. Legend holds that Leonardo painted the young angel holding Jesus' robe with such superior skill that Verrocchio, witnessing his student's surpassing talent, purportedly put down his brush and never painted again. Whether literally true or not, the story captures Renaissance culture's celebration of individual achievement. The student surpasses the master. Genius reveals itself and cannot be denied, not even by those it surpasses. The illegitimate boy from Vinci had proven that talent could overcome birth status. Merit could triumph over circumstance. Emotion value tense. Then came 1476. Emotion value tense/Zand, everything changed again. Picture Leonardo at 24, established in Florence's artistic community, his reputation growing, his future seemingly secure. The angel in the Baptism of Christ had demonstrated his extraordinary talent. Patrons were beginning to notice him. The years of apprenticeship were paying off. On April 9th, an anonymous accusation appeared in a tamburo, one of the complaint boxes where Florentine citizens could report crimes anonymously. These boxes, placed throughout the city, allowed denunciations without requiring the accuser to identify themselves. The charge: sodomy involving a 17-year-old male model named Jacopo Saltarelli, who worked as a goldsmith's apprentice. In Renaissance Florence, sodomy was a capital offense. The penalty could be death by burning at the stake. Leonardo found himself arrested alongside 3 other young men from prominent Florentine families. What happens when the marginal becomes even more marginal? When the outsider is pushed further outside? Leonardo had already lived his entire life with the stigma of illegitimate birth. Now he faced a second stigma, one that carried not just social exclusion but potential execution. Imagine the fear, the shame, the knowledge that everything you had built could be destroyed by an anonymous accusation you might never be able to refute. The arrest records becoming public knowledge. The whispers that would follow you forever through Florence's interconnected social networks, where everyone knew everyone and reputation was everything. The uncertainty of not knowing whether powerful enemies had orchestrated the accusation or whether it was simply bad luck. The charges were dropped 2 months later, in June 1476, on condition that no further accusations emerged. The case was dismissed, probably due to insufficient evidence or the intervention of powerful connections. One of the other accused men came from the Tornabuoni family, related by marriage to Lorenzo de' Medici himself. Political protection may have shielded all the defendants from punishment. But the damage was done. The accusation had been public. The arrests had been public. Even without conviction, the scandal would follow Leonardo through Florence's interconnected social networks. Leonardo essentially disappeared from the historical record for the next 2 years. A period scholar struggled to document with any certainty. Where did he go? What did he do? We don't know. The historical record falls silent. Then it picks up again around 1478 when he established independent practice in Florence. But something had changed in those silent years. Here's what makes Leonardo's response to this double marginalization so remarkable. He didn't retreat into safety. He didn't conform to expectations hoping to rehabilitate his reputation. Instead, He leaned into his outsider status. If society would judge him regardless of his behavior, then he might as well pursue his own vision without concern for social approval. If the doors were going to remain closed anyway, why waste energy trying to open them? His notebooks from this period reveal the method behind the genius. He kept journals in which he wrote almost daily, plus separate sheets of observations, comments, and plans. An estimated 13,000 pages would accumulate over his lifetime, none published during his life. Written backwards in mirror script with his left hand, they show a mind that leaped from shadows and light to bird flight to architectural designs without pause, following connections that only Leonardo could see. Lists of experiments and results appeared alongside anatomical sketches and mechanical apparatus, pumps, military weapons, hydraulic systems. This wasn't scattered thinking. It was systematic investigation across disciplines that wouldn't even have names for another 3 centuries. First, I shall do some experiments before I proceed farther, Leonardo wrote, articulating a revolutionary principle. Because my intention is to cite experience first, and then with reasoning show why such experience is bound to operate in such a way. Read that sentence again. This is the scientific method, articulated more than a century before Francis Bacon formally described it. Experiment first, then explain. Observe reality, then theorize. This approach represented rebellion against medieval thinking that still entangled his contemporaries' worldview despite the Renaissance flowering around them. Around 1477, Leonardo finally established independent practice in Florence. But commercial success eluded him in devastating fashion. Over the next 5 years, he received only 3 commissions. 2 were never finished. 1 was never even started. Why couldn't the greatest genius of his age complete commissioned paintings? The answer reveals the price of Leonardo's unique mind. His perfectionism meant nothing was ever good enough. His boundless curiosity meant every project suggested 10 more directions to explore. His refusal to accept conventional wisdom meant he spent more time solving problems no one else saw than executing the work patrons expected on schedule. The Adoration of the Magi, commissioned in July 1481 by the monks of San Donato Escopedo with a 30-month deadline, sat unfinished in his studio. Its extraordinary underpainting suggested forms that would never receive color, compositions that would never be completed. The altar painting for the chapel of Saint Bernard in the Palazzo Vecchio, commissioned in January 1478, never progressed beyond preliminary sketches. Emotion value tense, Florence had painters in abundance. Botticelli, Ghirlandaio, Filippino Lippi, all competing for the same patrons and commissions. The market was fierce, and Leonardo, for all his genius, couldn't deliver finished products on schedule. His elegant bearing and reserved demeanor won approval in courtly circles, but his perpetual incompletions frustrated patrons expecting results. His reputation became one of extraordinary talent and equally extraordinary unreliability. What do you do when you're a commercial failure in your home city? When the very qualities that make you extraordinary also make you unreliable? When your illegitimate birth and sodomy scandal have already marked you as doubly marginal? When the city that trained you has no place for what you've become? You reinvent yourself. Completely. In 1482, at 30 years old, Leonardo abandoned 2 prestigious commissions in Florence and wrote what may be history's most audacious cover letter. He addressed it to Duke Ludovico Sforza of Milan, and he didn't lead with his paintings. Think about that decision. Leonardo had spent his entire adult life developing as a painter. His reputation, such as it was, rested on artistic skill. The angel in the baptism of Christ, the revolutionary 3/4 pose of Ginevra da Vinci, the unfinished but promising adoration of the Magi. Any reasonable person applying for patronage would emphasize these accomplishments, would lead with strength rather than weakness. Leonardo buried painting in a single dismissive phrase, "Whatever may be done." Instead, he opened his letter to the Duke with military engineering. "Most illustrious lord," he began, "having now sufficiently considered the specimens of all those who proclaim themselves skilled contrivers of instruments of war, he positioned himself among elite military engineers before Ludovico even learned he could paint. Then came the enumeration of capabilities that reads like a modern resume optimized for the client's needs rather than the provider's accomplishments. Each item addressed a specific military challenge that Milan faced: portable bridges for advancing armies that could be rapidly assembled and just as rapidly destroyed when retreat became necessary. Methods to drain trenches during sieges through water management techniques he had already begun exploring in Florence. Techniques for destroying fortified positions built on rock. A crucial capability in Italian military conflicts where castles perched on seemingly impregnable heights. Mortars designed for psychological warfare that could fling small stones almost resembling a storm, creating terror among enemy troops. Vessels resistant to cannon fire for naval engagements. Secret underground passages and tunnels for siege operations. Covered chariots safe and unattackable that anticipated armored vehicles by 4 centuries. Catapults, mangonels, and other siege weapons that improved on ancient designs. Before peacetime, architecture for public and private buildings, water management and hydraulic engineering, sculpture in marble, bronze, and clay. Only in the final paragraph did painting receive that throwaway mention. Whatever may be done, the accomplishment that had consumed his 20s dismissed as an afterthought. This wasn't modesty. It was strategic genius of a different order entirely. Leonardo understood what the Duke needed. Milan existed in perpetual low-level conflict with neighboring states. Venice threatened from the east. France cast covetous eyes from the north. The Italian peninsula was a chessboard of competing powers, and military technology could determine which states survived and which were absorbed by their neighbors. Fortifications needed improvement. Siege capabilities required enhancement. A duke who could deploy superior military technology gained strategic advantage that no amount of artistic patronage could match. Florence wanted paintings. Milan wanted solutions. Leonardo could provide both, but success required emphasizing the scarcer skill. He recognized which market valued which approach and moved accordingly. This was not deception but strategic repositioning, matching his capabilities to the needs of his potential patron. The letter's conclusion demonstrated confidence without arrogance. Leonardo offered to conduct experiments in the Duke's park, inviting empirical demonstration rather than demanding trust based on past achievements. He framed everything around Ludovico's needs rather than reciting his own accomplishments. Show, don't tell. Results, not promises. The strategy worked. Leonardo secured the position as painter and engineer of the Duke, a role extending far beyond art into architecture, military fortifications, and hydraulic engineering. His 17-year tenure in Milan from 1482 to 1499 would prove the most productive period of his career, the years when his genius found its fullest expression. And it all happened because he was an outsider. Because illegitimate birth had freed him from the notary profession that would have consumed his life. Because the sodomy scandal had pushed him further outside conventional society, teaching him that approval from others was not necessary for meaningful work. Because commercial failure in Florence had forced him to recognize that his true genius lay not in finishing paintings, but in imagining possibilities that others couldn't see. Today, We celebrate career pivots as signs of adaptability and intelligence. We admire founders who abandon failing ventures to pursue better opportunities. We praise strategic repositioning that aligns individual strengths with market demands. We write business school case studies about reinvention. Leonardo invented this playbook 5 centuries before business schools existed. He didn't just create art, he created the template for professional reinvention that ambitious people still follow today. Picture Leonardo arriving in Milan in 1482 or early 1483. 30 years old, a failed painter by commercial standards, a double outsider by social standards, and yet, supremely confident that he had capabilities the Duke desperately needed. The philosophical rift between Florence and Milan worked in his favor. Florence under the Medici had embraced Neoplatonism, a sophisticated fusion of Platonic idealism and Christian mysticism that dominated intellectual discourse. Beautiful theories about the nature of reality, elegant arguments about ideal forms, philosophy that prized abstraction over application. Leonardo's empirical mind had chafed against this abstraction. He wanted to test, to measure, to experiment. Florence valued beautiful theories. Milan valued practical results. Leonardo found his place at last. Milan's more strict. Academic atmosphere suited him perfectly. The mechanical satisfactions of engineering called to his empirical mind. The resistance of water against canal walls. The calculated trajectory of projectiles from siege weapons. The grinding of bronze gears in clockwork mechanisms. The smell of gunpowder from explosive devices. The weight of metal in his hands as he tested prototype components. These were things you could measure, test, improve through experiment rather than philosophical speculation. His notebooks flourished in Milan like never before. Observations about shadows and light merged with notes on bird wings. Studying flight with the same intensity he brought to painting. Lists of experiments included tests of water flow, tension in architectural members, optical phenomena that later informed his painting technique. Each note recorded not abstract theory but observed experience, the foundation of his revolutionary method. Leonardo would eventually produce The Last Supper, one of the most famous paintings in human history. He would create the Mona Lisa, whose mysterious smile has fascinated viewers for 5 centuries. Break time : the 100 miss / he would fill notebooks with anatomical drawings that wouldn't be surpassed for 300 years. He would design flying machines, armored vehicles, hydraulic systems, and architectural wonders that anticipated development centuries after his death. But none of it would have happened if he had been legitimate. None of it would have happened if the university doors had opened and he had dutifully followed his father into the notary profession. None of it would have happened if social conformity had been available to him and he had chosen the safe path. The illegitimate boy from Vinci didn't just overcome his birth status. He transformed it into his greatest advantage, excluded from traditional education. He created his own curriculum that combined disciplines no one had thought to merge. Barred from respectable professions, he invented new ones. Pushed to the margins of society, he reimagined what was possible from that marginal position. Leonardo's dual marginalization, illegitimate birth intensified by sodomy scandal, freed him from conventional career paths while limiting access to certain opportunities. This complex relationship between constraint and creative freedom enabled his revolutionary thinking. Every door that closed pushed him toward a window that led somewhere more interesting. Today, we look back at Leonardo da Vinci as the quintessential Renaissance man, the universal genius who mastered painting, sculpture, architecture, music, mathematics, engineering, literature, anatomy, geology, astronomy, botany, writing, history, and cartography. We see the finished product of genius without fully appreciating how that genius was forged in the fires of exclusion and constraint. We celebrate his achievements without recognizing that those achievements were only possible because conventional paths were denied to him. Every closed door pushed him toward open windows. Every exclusion forced him to find alternative paths. Every stigma freed him from expectations he never chose to accept. What if being born a bastard was the best thing that ever happened to you? For Leonardo da Vinci, the answer was clear. The very circumstances that should have destroyed him instead set him free. The outsider status that marked him from birth gave him permission to see the world differently, to question what others accepted, to pursue knowledge across boundaries that legitimate sons dared not cross. The illegitimate boy from Vinci became the most famous artist in human history, not despite his marginal status, because of it. And it all started with a baby born without a legitimate name, in a small Tuscan village, on a warm spring evening 573 years ago. A child who would change civilization, a child whose first act of rebellion was simply existing. Sometimes the greatest blessing arrives disguised as a curse. Sometimes exclusion creates the very conditions for extraordinary achievement. Sometimes the outsider sees what insiders cannot see, precisely because they stand apart from the crowd. Leonardo knew this truth from the moment he could understand his own story. He never stopped being an outsider. He simply learned to make that outsider status his greatest strength. He transformed the curse of his birth into the blessing of his freedom. That lesson echoes across 5 centuries to reach us today. In a world that still prizes conformity, that still rewards those who follow prescribed paths, Leonardo's life offers a different model. The dropout founders, the career changers, the late bloomers, the misfits who succeed by refusing to accept limitations that society tries to impose. The bastard's blessing isn't a contradiction. It's a formula for freedom. And Leonardo da Vinci proved it with every boundary he crossed, every discipline he mastered, every creation that emerged from a mind freed by exclusion to imagine without limits. What doors have closed in your life? What exclusions have marked you as different? What circumstances have seemed like curses rather than blessings? Leonardo would tell you to look again. The closed doors might be guiding you toward windows that lead somewhere extraordinary. The exclusions might be freeing you from paths that would have limited your potential. The apparent curses might contain blessings you haven't yet recognized. The illegitimate boy from Vinci didn't become Leonardo da Vinci despite his circumstances. He became Leonardo da Vinci because of them. And 500 years later, his life still teaches us what becomes possible when we transform our marginality into our greatest strength.